I'd like to point out that this will be a general read. We're looking at the general influence of the stars upon our life. If you would like to know something more specific about your life and how the stars are specifically interacting with you, I would suggest getting a reading with a professional astrologer. You can do so with me through the link in the description below if you would like. I'd like to give a special welcome to anyone who is new to astrology. You're so welcome here at this channel. If you would like to learn to read your own astrology chart, I offer a short course. It's very cheap and it's lots of fun. The link is in the description below. To all of my friends who join me here each week, who like and share my videos and subscribe to my channel, I do love you. To my gold and silver and bronze star family members, I do pray for you every day. I thank the universe for your presence in my life. If anyone would like to join the Guiding Star family, the link is also in the description below. And now to this week's spotlight. You've caught me! Are you wondering when love will come into your life? Did you know that it takes at least 3 energy triggers to bring love into a person's life? And that there are 62 different triggers for bringing love into your life? If you're an aspiring astrologer, this is something you need to know, as the number one question astrologers get asked is, when is love coming into my life? Why not join me for my course in finding out when love will come? Find it out for yourself, find it out for your clients. Let's learn together when the stars will align for love. The link to my astrology course is in the description below. And remember, every one of us deserves to know love. Hello, I'm Kesenya, and welcome to this series that I've been preparing for you all about Neptune and Neptune's transits through every house in the horoscope and how it will affect your life. Now, I've been wanting to do this series for quite some time now. However, I decided I'd wait until Neptune had crossed my ascendant and my first house lord. In doing so, there's a strategy behind this. I wanted to see how Neptune would play out in my life on those very significant and key points in my chart. Astrology is 50% reading books and doing courses and getting mentors and teachers, and the other 50% is observation and experience of the planets in your life. So the older you get, the more wisdom, the more knowledge that you will have about how planets impact us. So now that I've gone through those particular transits of Neptune in my first house, I feel that I'm ready to talk more in depth about this very watery planet. So let's start by having a look at what Neptune is all about astronomically. So Neptune comes after Uranus in the order of the planets. We have Mercury, Venus, the Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, boom, Neptune. Second to last of the key players in astrology. Pluto is still considered to be a planet of influence in astrological circles, and therefore Neptune is the second last. Now, when Neptune was discovered, it wasn't through observation. They didn't sort of spot Neptune in the sky and go, aha, there it is, because you actually need a telescope to see Neptune. It's not something you can observe with the naked eye. And so Neptune was discovered through mathematics. Basically, the astrologers of the time when Neptune was discovered, and we're going to talk about that when Neptune was discovered in just a minute, but the astrologers of the time were observing Uranus, and they had mathematically predicted where Uranus was going to go according to all their observations, and then Uranus did his usual quirky thing and did not follow the predicted orbit. And so from that, they were able to calculate that there must be a planet further out that's pulling on Neptune, and its gravitational force has caused it to move in a different way than we expected or anticipated. And so because of their mathematical calculations, they began to look for another planet beyond Uranus. And voila, we have Neptune. Now, what is very interesting, and this is quite telling about the character of Neptune actually as well, what is very interesting is that Galileo had observed Neptune back in 1612. He didn't realize that Neptune was a planet. I don't know what he thought it was, but he didn't sort of put 2 and 2 together and think, there's another planet out there. So Galileo had observed Neptune, and this was a whole 234 years before the discovery of Neptune. Now, why I say this correlates to sort of the ambiguous nature of Neptune is that he's a bit slippery as a planet. It's hard to sort of pin down. So here was Galileo observing Neptune, not realizing what he was, not sort of seeing it for what it was, basically sort of under an illusion that Neptune was something else. That is a very Neptunian quality, which we'll talk about very soon. But 234 years later, we had the discovery of Neptune in the real through that mathematical observation that I was talking about. This was in 1846. Now, most people know that when we discover new planets, there is often a rise in consciousness or an increase in conscious awareness in humanity on the Earth at the time of the discovery of a new planet. For example, when Uranus was discovered, we had a number of revolutions occurring around the world. What does Uranus correlate to? It correlates to freedom, liberation, equality, and equal distribution of resources. And what were these revolutions about all around the world? Well, namely, the French Revolution was occurring when Uranus was discovered. And that was about no more let them eat cake kind of stuff, no more of the aristocracy living in opulent luxury beyond compare while the poor people of the land went hungry and could barely clothe and feed themselves. And of course, Uranus, sorry to diverge off Neptune, but Uranus is all about those things, equality. And so the conscious awareness of the planet had reached a point where it was like, no, now hang on, we're not going to take this inequality anymore. We want things to be fairer. We want things to be more even. And lo and behold, at the discovery of Uranus, which rules those things, the consciousness was ripe and ready to embrace that as part of its awareness. Now, the same occurs with Neptune, who was discovered a little while after, as I said, in 1846. So what was the expansion of consciousness that occurred at the time Neptune was discovered? Well, we had an invention of photography that had occurred sort of 20 years before. Now, when we're talking about these big planetary discoveries, this is no mediocre discovery. This is really kick-ass stuff. And so we look at the surrounding sort of, 20, 30 years as an era of the discovery of Neptune. Keep in mind, when I'm talking about this, that up until the discovery of Uranus in the late 1700s, there had the existence of planets beyond what you could see with the naked eye was not known, was not proven. And so for thousands of years, the consciousness of humanity had been in a state where it was only aware of what it could see, touch, taste, hear, and smell. In the real, in the earthly dimension. If you couldn't see beyond Saturn, then there were no planets beyond Saturn. And then all of a sudden, at the discovery of Uranus, boom, we have an awareness of more. And so Uranus was discovered, and then Neptune was discovered. And so the surrounding sort of 30 odd years in the vicinity of 1846 when Neptune was discovered are Neptunian times. And so we look at what was unfolding in consciousness then. And as I just said a moment ago, photography. Photography was discovered. Neptune rules photography. Motion pictures were discovered 30 years or so after the discovery of Neptune. And Neptune rules motion pictures. The spiritualist movements were unfolding around the world. We started to find people who were interested in sort of hypnosis and mesmerism, people who would be, looking at channeling, people who wanted to conduct seances. These sorts of things started to come into vogue as parlor games, as did the tarot card readings and even astrological readings as sort of, like I said, parlor games, entertainment at fancy people's dinner parties and so on. That was the very glamorous side of Neptunian times, using those spiritualist things as entertainments for glamorous people. Plastics were discovered around this time. Braille for the blind, writing for the blind. Antiseptics. Pasteurization was discovered and started to be used. And these are just a few of the advancements that occurred in society around the time that Neptune was discovered. We also had cultural movements like Romanticism, the poets, Byron and Shelley around this time as well. We had, alongside Byron and Shelley, we had things like the Frankenstein novel or the Dracula novel, which is a very interesting thing. Impressionism was also the painting style en vogue around this era of history. And we also had the Communist Manifesto that was written. Now, some people, if you're not familiar with politics, the name communism can conjure up all sorts of negative imagery in your head. But the idea behind communism was a bit like Uranus in that it was about equality and compassion to everybody. So these are combinations of both Uranian themes, which is equality and sort of an even playing field for everybody. And also Neptune, which is highly compassionate, wanting everybody to get an opportunity. And of course, Neptune, for those who we haven't got to this point yet, but Neptune rules idealism as well. So the ideal of the Communist Manifesto was present in these Neptunian times as well. Whether it actually functioned and worked was another matter, but the ideal was there. A utopian vision for society is what Neptune is all about, and so there's no surprise that we had movements in that direction towards that ideal at this time. Back to the astronomy, Neptune is a planet that's made up of liquid and ice. And it's also full of different gases as well. So it's quite a combination, Neptune, of many things. But it's very similar in its size and its structure to its nearest planet, which is Uranus. They're almost twin-like in many senses, even though they function very differently astrologically. Like Uranus, Neptune is actually circled by some very faint rings of dust. Uranus's rings are more visible, but Neptune does have rings as well, very light, very faint rings around Neptune. If you've seen images of Neptune that were taken, I think it was by the Voyager space probe, I may be wrong there, but if memory serves me, I think it was Voyager that took images of Neptune, you'll know that it's this beautiful, serene, blue-looking planet that has some wafting sort of white, they look like clouds, around it occasionally. And despite its very serene-looking surface, it is quite a wild planet underneath. So again, that illusionary factor there. On the surface, it looks like it's cool, calm, collected, and underneath, it's not what it seems. On Neptune, winds whip around the planet at, I have to read this, 2,100 kilometers an hour, and they're furious winds. Not only that, Neptune takes only 16 hours to do a rotation. It's heaps bigger than Earth, Neptune, lots bigger than Earth. And we take 24 hours as an Earth to rotate. But if you're a monstrous sized planet and you're spinning, doing a circuit of 16 hours, then the gravitational pull of Neptune becomes pretty phenomenal, despite the fact that you're mostly made up of gas. So this momentum of the gravitational force from the spin and the winds that whip around Neptune sort of whips up all the ice, methane, hydrogen, helium, and ammonia. Had to read that list to make sure I got the chemicals right. Whips it all up into a big slushy mess. So it's not this pure ethereal kind of atmosphere or body of Neptune. It's actually a bit of a slushy, wild mess when you get down to it. Now, some scientists, and this is very interesting, some scientists have hypothesized, just through their calculations and observations, that the core of Neptune, which is burning iron, very fiery, very hot core, they have hypothesized that there is a layer of diamond, liquid diamond, that encircles the core of Neptune. Now, just how they've reached that conclusion, don't ask me, but it is there in scientific journals that this is a hypothesis that could prove true and correct. Now, this iron core that's burning hot, white hot iron core, is actually bigger than the Earth. So the core, the solid mass, if you like, of Neptune is larger than the Earth, and it burns at about, or its temperature is about 5,000 degrees Celsius. So it's incredibly hot, even though it's so far from the sun and distant from the sun's rays, which is usually where heat comes from in the solar system. This Neptune has its own heat source through this burning iron core. So you're getting the picture? We have this impression of Neptune, of serenity on the outside astronomically, but not quite what it seems deep down. And again, we'll see that represented when we start talking about the astrology of Neptune and how it impacts us, and therefore how it's going to impact us when it travels through each house. We also can see that it is a very fluid type planet. It's, slushy, slippery, and of course Neptune rules the watery depths of the ocean, if you're familiar with mythology and the title of Neptune. We'll talk about that in just a second as well. I love the analogy that we're seeing here of this watery fluid planet, but it has a solidness at the core and a preciousness, the liquid diamond. There's something precious at the core of Neptune. Now, Neptune, as we've already stated, is invisible. You cannot see Neptune out on a fine stargazing night. You will always need a telescope to see Neptune. And as the old Hermetic principle goes, as above, so below, the way things appear in the sky from our vantage point on Earth is exactly how they will play out and be represented and reflected in our lives on the planet. What does that mean? Well, it means that the planets we can see with the naked eye, the visible planets, in astrology, they correlate and connect to what we experience visibly, tangibly, experientially on the Earth. Our touch, taste, sight, sound, and smell. The physical things of the experience of being a body incarnate on the Earth connect to visible planets and what they rule. When you get to Neptune, actually when you get to Uranus, Neptune and Pluto, they're all invisible without a telescope, and therefore they connect to the inner realm of the psyche, what motivates us unconsciously, our behavioral patterns, our things we can't help about ourselves, our deep psychological wounds and our karmas that we carry with us at the core of our self, at our soul level. They correspond to these invisible planets because as above, so below. We can't see them, therefore it's like the part of the iceberg that sits underneath the water. You can't see it, but it's still there packing a whopping punch, especially if you happen to be on the Titanic. So Neptune has at least 14 moons that circle it. It has a greater and denser gravity than the Earth. So if you're standing on Neptune, you will weigh a lot more than you do on the Earth. And it takes longer than one lifetime for Neptune to circle the sun. It takes 165 years. So in your lifetime, you will never see Neptune return to its natal place in your astrological chart. You just won't live that long, at least not in this day and age as I'm recording this video. Who knows what science might do in the future, but right now you won't live to be 165 and see Neptune come back to its natal position. Let's explore Neptune mythologically now. Well, Neptune is the name of the Roman god of the sea. Not only the sea though, in the oceans, but also of freshwater. Neptune was the Roman god of freshwater as well. And we often see Neptune in mythological pictorial representation with his trident. And of course, what is the symbol of Neptune astrologically? It's a trident. So there we go. There's so much correlation between the mythologies and what plays out in the skies again here. So again, there's no coincidences that when the astronomers discovered Neptune, they didn't know that it was made mostly of liquid and gas. They didn't know it was mostly a fluid planet. But lo and behold, here we are. They gave it the name Neptune, king of the oceans, and Neptune is quite an oceanic planet with its liquid mass. Once again, this is showing us how the conscious awareness works, even in unconscious ways. Now, a little bit more about Neptune mythologically was that he was the son of the Titan god Saturn. Now, along with Neptune, there was Jupiter and there was Pluto that were the sons of Saturn. And Jupiter, Neptune, Pluto didn't really get along with Saturn very well. If you're familiar with the mythology of Saturn and Jupiter, you'll know that the mother of Jupiter hid him away because Saturn had a habit of eating his children lest they rise up against him and take over. So theoretically, in the mythology, Neptune and Pluto were gobbled up by their father Saturn. But then along came Jupiter when he was all grown up to the rescue, and Saturn regurgitated his offspring, Neptune and Pluto. There were others as well, but the main ones were Neptune and Pluto, the brothers of Jupiter. And together, Jupiter, Neptune and Pluto overthrew their father Saturn, and Jupiter became king of the gods, and we had the reign of the Olympian gods from that point on, which include Neptune and Pluto. So Jupiter, Neptune and Pluto are the Olympian gods. Saturn was the Titan god, and Uranus, who was the father of Saturn, just to confuse matters even further, was not a Titan and not an Olympian. He was sort of one of the forefathers of them all. In ancient Greece and Rome, they celebrated the role of water in their lives, and they had a festival to celebrate this, and it was known as Neptunalia. There was also another festival that occurred at the similar time called Ferinalia. I won't go into the mythology of that name, but they were both celebrated around the same time. So July 23rd and July 25th, the role of water and the preciousness of water in life was celebrated with these festivals. So Neptunalia was a time of honoring the god Neptune and its watery association. So let's take a peek at the astrology of Neptune. I'm going to tell you all about Neptune astrologically. What is Neptune about? Well, as we've already come across, Neptune is about illusion, seeing something and actually realizing it's something else. It's not what it seems. So that can be a number of things can be displayed that way. Glamour is ruled by Neptune, because if you're glamorous, you've got amazing makeup and hair and beautiful, shimmering, gorgeous clothes and stuff. You look very glamorous, but is that who you really are? When you wake up in bed in the morning, and your hair's a tousled mess and you haven't got makeup on and you're wearing your baggy old t-shirt, you might not look glamorous. So glamour is ruled by Neptune because it's part of that deception, if you like, but not a bad deception. It's just a deception. It's not what it seems. Neptune, in that sense, rules glamour. Neptune, as we've already discussed, rules a desire to return to utopia, to achieve utopia, to create heaven on earth, so to speak. So that can be a very positive thing if we're wanting to make the world a better place. And Neptune is also quite a compassionate planet. There is a lot of unconditional love that goes along with Neptune, brotherly love, the idea of anyone can be saved from their horrible life or, their difficulties or their own ill choices in life. Neptune has this sort of unconditional love. Some might refer to that as this redeemer quality about it. And Neptune can be connected to miracles as well, because if somebody is raised up from the muck and mire into a wonderful life, well, that is often seen as a miracle. And that transformation that occurs is a very Neptunian associated thing in astrology. Part of this desire for utopia can actually have connections to a longing to escape the horror and the harshness of earthly reality. And those of us who are very Neptunian, who have a strong Neptune in our chart, or even a strong 12th house or a strong Pisces, will know what this is all about. The wanting to escape from earth and earth realities because they're too hard to bear. They're fearful. Earth is a fearful place for these highly sensitive Neptunian, Piscean, 12th house souls, and it's almost too hard. So Neptune is also associated with tremendous longing to tap out, to escape, a longing to go to heaven. Now you'll see a lot of religious groups, fanatical religious groups going down this road where it doesn't matter what I endure in this lifetime, I will be rewarded when I go to heaven. And that's all they're living for. They don't even engage in earthly reality and earthly life because it's only about heaven and getting to heaven after this horrible life is over. That's a Neptunian thing. Also, Neptune has this idea about it of wanting to return to the watery depths, i.e. the womb, being in the embryonic fluid, being safe and secure, not having to sort of struggle and make it on our own because, hey, we've got everything we need. We're warm, we're safe, we're fed, we're in the womb. And Neptune has this desire for that too. So it's a dual desire for paradise, heaven, but also at the same time a desire to, return to the safety and security of home, so to speak. Neptune can also give a longing to be saved. You want your hero to come along and rescue you from this, terrible existence. That's a Neptunian longing. But also, if we find that we desire to be the rescuer, we want to be somebody's hero, that's a Neptunian thing as well. So there's often a spiritual connection with Neptune, and I'm sure from what I've just described, you can see connections in religious circles to savior mentality, redeemer qualities, longing for paradise. You can see where Neptune's getting its sort of shadow side of spirituality popping up there in religious, ideology. But Neptune is also in the positive side, which I love to talk about more, is the beautiful connection to angelic realms, to the divine. So if we channel higher wisdom, higher knowledge, that's a Neptune thing. If we're channeling creativity, beauty, art, if we're channeling unconditional love. And now I'm talking about channeling here, not in the sort of, some entity speaking through me, although that is a Neptunian thing. I'm talking about simply expressing things that come from beyond us. Beautiful things, gracious things, ethereal things, things that come from beyond the earthly plane. That spiritual side of Neptune is so beautiful. So Neptune is the manifestation of divine love, divine grace, and divine creativity, divine creative ideals. He is connected to visualization, imagination, and even healing through visualization and imagination. The idea that through your thought processes and lifting them to a higher plane, dreaming and aspiring of what it could be, that you can heal yourself. And again, we come back to the miraculous component here, where people are miraculously healed. Neptune has connections to hypnosis as well, and mesmerism. In fact, Mesmer was the man who developed the idea of being hypnotized as a form of healing. So the two are very similar. And so Neptune has connections with this as well. It's all very interesting, but Neptune is actually a planet that it's hard to define him, and I use the word him loosely, as a masculine planet. Now, Neptune as a god was a masculine god, but the expression of Neptune is actually very feminine. It errs on the feminine side. So it would be very interesting to understand exactly how they reached the concept in ancient mythology that Neptune, the god of the oceans, was actually a man. I feel maybe that came about at the time of the ancient Greeks and Romans when the patriarchy was establishing itself, because really the expression of Neptune is this compassionate, unconditionally loving, highly creative energy, which connects more to the water signs and the watery energy, which is feminine in astrology. So very interesting there. Neptune is a more feminine energy expression. Neptune rules the sign of Pisces in modern astrology, and of course that is a water sign as well. Neptune is also in astrology neither benefic nor malefic. So that means, we don't put a label of good or bad on him. But really with Neptune, it depends what aspects you have to your placement of Neptune in the chart, whether he will manifest his shadow side or whether he will manifest his light side in your life. And we've kind of talked a little bit about both here now. I will talk further about the shadow side in just a second. But if you have mostly good aspects, like a conjunction, we can classify that as a good aspect, or perhaps a trine or a sextile to Neptune from other planets, then it's looking good for you. Neptune will tend to express in its more angelic form. It's more miraculous, blessed form. But if you have quite a mixed bag, maybe you've got some squares to your Neptune, maybe you've got some oppositions to your Neptune. If that's what it's looking like, then you may end up with a bit more of the shadow side exhibiting in your personality or what you attract in your life. Let's explore what that is all about. Well, some of the shadow side of Neptune is in the desire for utopia. We want to see evil people punished. And you'll see this a lot expressing in religions, where we just want everyone who's bad to go to hell. And that's actually a shadow Neptunian energy, because we want to preserve utopia for the pure and everyone else can suffer, So that's a shadow side expression of Neptune. Narcissism can be connected with Neptune's shadow side as well. And so can masochism, actually. If we think about this desire to be seen as holy and pure, often that connects to making ourselves falsely humble and lower than another person. And that can incite in another person distaste, and disgust for another person who is falsely humble. And of course, if you're familiar with the idea of masochism, then you know that it's about debasing yourself in order that you might feel more worthy or more holy because you've made yourself lowly. It's a very slippery, shall we say, concept. And again, not everything is as it seems. It might seem with someone who is in a masochist state that they don't care about themselves, that they don't love themselves, that they're being cruel to themselves. But very often under the surface is this energy of wanting, the best way I can describe it, to be pure through making yourself lowly, like the flagellants did in ancient medieval times through whipping themselves. Oh, they're so pure and holy because they're whipping themselves for Christ. It's that kind of idea. Odd one, but not everything is as it seems with Neptune and Neptune's shadow side. Projection is something that is actually a Neptunian behavioral quality coming from this psychological depth. If we have separation anxiety, that's a shadow side of Neptune. Of course it is, because we are longing to return to the womb. And when we're separate from that safe space, separation anxiety. So if you're looking at those psychological issues in a chart and, assessing that, look at Neptune and what Neptune's doing in the chart. Shadow side of Neptune can be idealization, where we don't see a person clearly for who they are, but we put them on a pedestal. So celebrity culture would be one expression of that. Anyone we put on a pedestal and hold up there, and we create an illusion around that person. It's not the truth. It's not real. It's not what is really going on at the core of a person to have them up on a pedestal and think that, oh my God, they're so perfect. That's idealization, and that's Neptune shadow side, as is hysteria, as is addiction. Addiction's another expression here. And why? Because addiction is escapism. If we're addicted to drugs, usually with Neptune involved, it's because we want to get away from the harshness of reality. If we're addicted to alcohol, again, it's an escape mechanism and it's an escape valve, but not a healthy one, because reality is too harsh and we just long to get out of here. Obviously, deception is a shadow side of Neptune, because if you're creating an illusion, while there can be sort of times when that's good, as in the case of glamour and that's fun and what have you, sometimes when we are creating an illusion, we're deceiving others. We're pulling the wool over their eyes. We're not being our true self, and that is a shadow Neptune expression. Sacrifice, I would say, is a shadow Neptunian expression. Again, it comes in close context with this false humility kind of behavior. If we feel that we have to sacrifice ourselves for another person, then we're kind of making ourselves to be better than the other person. I'll go in, I'll sacrifice myself, and then that person will be saved. And there's a false humility about it, a deceptive humility that goes along with that. And of course, oftentimes when people have strong Neptune representations in the chart, they lose themselves, they martyr themselves for the sake of another. Does that benefit their life? No, usually. But it might make them feel spiritually greater, or that they have been a noble person. Again, we've got this sacrifice energy that's a bit not what it seems, and this is also the shadow side of Neptune. Victimization is another Neptunian energy where, poor me, I am suffering because life has been unkind, and therefore I am longing to get away from life, and return to the womb or go to paradise because I have been victimized. Instead of being our own savior, instead of making the best of things and doing what we can to transform our karma, no, we're a victim and we just want to escape. That's so Neptunian shadow side. Especially, you could call it suffering that's seen as purity. So these are some of the Neptunian shadow energies. I don't want to leave it on that though. There are good things, obviously, that Neptune correlates to. We've talked about some of these, but, others might be the belief that there is enough for everybody, and that the universe can be kind and the universe has our back. In fact, transcendence of matter is a very big Neptunian theme. The belief that eventually good will win over evil. That's Neptunian as well. Jesus' teachings were very Neptunian. He was, after all, the avatar for the age of Pisces, which was ruled by Neptune. So compassion, unconditional love, we've talked about that. Forgiveness, healing, all these things, divine healing, miraculous healing. These are Neptunian ruled things. So Jesus was a big representation of Neptune energy in the positive. The most creative and artistic planet, we've already talked about that. And it's actually at its strongest capacity in water signs. So Neptune does very well in Pisces, Cancer, or Scorpio. She will tend to give the best results if that's where he is in your natal chart, but also if that's where he's transiting at any given time, he's going to give the better side of himself to you. Neptune rules the color light blue. Hence, I have my blue blouse on here today for this video, but I've also worn my very well, you might not be able to see it because the color in this camera doesn't actually come up that good. I need to get a new camera, but it's actually a very beautiful velvet jacket that's ocean color, like the kind of tranquil turquoise that we see up on the beaches of Queensland or some beautiful tropical beaches. And I thought, seeing as Neptune rules these gorgeous oceans, I would wear my beautiful aqua turquoise color velvet jacket with my light blue Neptunian top. Neptune can also have connections to lavender, purpley colors also. Hence, we see often people who work in spiritual, sort of new agey fields have a lot of purple going on, because often they might not be aware of this even, but they're probably highly Neptunian people. They have a strong Neptune in their chart, and so the purple element tends to come through quite a lot, and you'll see a lot of, websites and stuff with purple this and lavender that on many spiritual sites. Neptune rules the gemstone amethyst as well, and so amethyst has a lot of qualities to it that correlate very strongly to Neptune. Some tangible things, and I did say in the beginning Neptune's more psychological. Yep, that's true, very true, but Neptune does have some governance of certain items on the planet, namely because of what was happening at the time Neptune was discovered, what things were starting to be used and utilized when Neptune was discovered, and therefore Neptune gets the rulership of those things. So the ocean, obviously, but oils, plastics, impressionism, film, photography, advertising, poisons, escapism, that's not actually a tangible thing, but that's obviously something Neptune rules, drugs. As I've already illustrated, a lot of these things were being discovered. Film, photography, medications, the shipping industry, steam-powered ships were really starting to get a Guernsey around the time that Neptune came along. So shipping and the oceans, all of these things, highly Neptunian. Now, in my level 1 astrology course that is coming out, you can learn more about Neptune and the things Neptune rules, and we go into greater depth with Neptune there and its rulerships. So if you're interested in knowing more, check out that course. But what does Neptune want? It wants unwavering trust, unwavering love, an unwavering belief that the divine will come through for you. Even in the face of no evidence at all, Neptune wants us to believe. If you are 40 odd years old and you've never had a boyfriend, Neptune is saying, keep believing and the miracle can happen. And I would encourage you, if that's the case, well, wait till you're 42. Who knows? Neptune, when it reaches its maturation at 42, may just bring you what you've been waiting for. So that's a short look at the beautiful and quite intriguing and unusual planet of Neptune. Now let's have a look at what Neptune is all about when he travels through a house in the horoscope and what he's going to do for you while he's there. So how do we find out whereabouts Neptune is transiting in our chart? Well, it's really very simple. Firstly, you'll need to use a program, for example, like planetwatcher.com. If you Google planetwatcher.com, it will just take you to a chart of the moment instantaneously. That's the first thing that comes up on the screen when you Google it. And it will show you where each of the planets are and what sign they're in. Now, you'll need to be familiar with the planetary glyphs and the planetary sign symbols as well to be able to understand it. But basically, if you know what you're looking for, Neptune is the trident-looking symbol. You'll be able to find whereabouts Neptune is at this current point in time when you're watching this video. And once you know what sign that we're currently having Neptune in, then you can find out where that correlates to your chart, your personal chart. You will need to know your rising sign. Let me give you an example. Let's say that your rising sign happens to be Capricorn. There we are. So the rising sign, Capricorn. Then what we need to do is count from your rising sign to the sign where Neptune is currently transiting. In this example, I'm using Pisces, Neptune in Pisces. So we're going to count 1, 2, 3 signs. And that tells us, in this example, that Neptune is in the 3rd house. And therefore, this will be the video for you. Now, if you are a different sort of configuration, let's say you've got a Neptune 8 houses from your rising sign, then you'll want to look at the video for Neptune transiting through the 8th house to understand how it's going to apply to you. But in this example, for this video, we're looking at Neptune through the 3rd house. Let's take a look. Well, this is a 14-year transit of Neptune through this area of the chart, the time when your mind can expand. Neptune is no boundaries. Neptune is to remove anything that stands in the way, so to speak. And so we expand our mind. The 3rd house is the house of the mind and thinking and communicating. It's writing, it's speaking, it's learning, how we learn. It's so many things. So the first thing is that our mental boundaries expand. Whatever mental limitations that you might have put on yourself, your sort of analytical thinking, that's going to be sort of pushed out now. Now, it's not that Neptune expands whatever it touches. It's just that Neptune has no boundaries. So in that sense, there is a moving out of your mental capacities. You might understand things in a whole new way that you never have before. You might also start to have a more mental perception of ethereal topics. And what do I mean by that? It means that your mind, your analytical mind, starts to understand mystical things. Maybe beforehand, you or someone you know who's going through this transit might have really only understood the world with a logical reference point, with, this is tangible, this is visible, this is how the world works, very mental and analytical. And suddenly with Neptune moving in this area of the mind, they start to perceive the world with a whole different lens. It's like, well, you know what? I had this energetic experience the other day that I couldn't explain. I think that there's something more to life than what I've been thinking all along. So the mental boundaries that have been on us, they change and they grow to embrace more ethereal things. Now, of course, this can give you a new mental attitude in your everyday life as well. If all you've ever done is think about how logically things work and, getting up, doing the dishes, vacuuming the house, going to work, blah, 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 let's do routine, let's do what is happening in the tangible world. All of a sudden, your mental outlook on life changes. You get up in the morning and you're like, oh my goodness, the beautiful sunshine. I'm just going to sit in the sun and absorb its rays and let it lift my spirits to begin my day. And then you might sort of, be driving to work and you notice that all the traffic lights turn green for you and you feel a connection with the divine because your mental outlook is noticing the ethereal and the synchronicities and the magic. Neptune is magic. So you're noticing the magic of life, like all the traffic lights going green for you, or the warmth of the sun, or the flowers in the garden in the morning, or a smile that someone gives you as you walk down the street. It's not that you become happier. That's not a thing either. But it's just that your mental outlook takes on a more Neptunian nature, which is more highly romanticized, more sensitized, and more observant of the magic in life. So you're thinking with the spirit now. You're thinking with your feelings now. And during this 14-year transit, you're going to find that your intuition and your feelings will win out over the top of rationality. Now that might be a big change of pace for some people, particularly people who've got a lot of planets in air signs. It's going to be like total opposite for you. But it's a beautiful experience just to connect with those inner emotions and to use them in your evaluation of everyday life. You also might find that your mental interests now tune into the ethereal topics. So you might get a subscription to, say, Gaia TV or something like that, or you might start watching more YouTube videos that are on mystical subjects, hypnotism. You might be exploring hypnotism or mysticism in some way, shamanism, metaphysics, astrology, the power of prayer. You might start researching or looking into the effects of prayer. The work of Masaru Emoto, who discussed the power of our thoughts over water molecules. That's one example of where your mind might go. Your analytical mind goes to ethereal topics when we have a transit of Neptune through the house of our mental approach to life. So even if you're very scientific by nature, naturally, you might start directing your scientific inquiry into the more magical, into the more mystical, into the more psychological and deep recesses of life. Not only that, but Neptune is a planet of imagination. And here in the third house, our imagination's just going to go wild with this transit. It's so much fun. You can be very inspired. If you like to write about fantasy things, then you're going to get the best downloads of your life under this transit. You're really going to be blessed to be able to dive into your imagination. You might write about those things, might speak about those things, might create some sort of things. Even with your hands, you might create very imaginative works, because the third house has connections to craftsmanship and how we use our hands. And so you might find with Neptune here that you get just wonderful inspirations for creative works. It might be a fabulous dress, or it could be a beautiful sculpture, or it might be some really tremendous piece of craftsmanship in sort of a furniture making or building or something like that, where you are constructing using your hands. Could even be if you're a hairdresser, you get amazing inspiration for new hair design, new hair color, or something like that, because this is a house of practical application of the work of our hands. And it's going to be an inspired time in those realms. Wonderful transit. Now, we can also, because Neptune is very utopian, it's idealistic, and it wants, the dream reality, which doesn't often occur in human form on Earth, let's face it. But Neptune desires that. So we can become very mentally idealistic during this time. We can become very optimistic and very visionary. So it can be a powerful time for using your imagination to construct the ideal life that you would like to live, or a utopian vision for maybe yourself particularly, but even for humanity, more so not humanity at large as in the globe, but your community. The third house has to do with our immediate community. Fourth house has to do with our tribe and people who are close-knit with us. But the third house is our community that we live in, our neighborhood, our locality. And so you might have some visionary ideals and utopian constructs for how your community might be able to move forward. But thinking in itself can become more abstract during this transit and potentially more universal as well. We are all one. How can we be in this together, and how can we, mentally work together to raise the vibration? And, that's where your thinking tends to go. Now, of course, there's a shadow side to everything in the horoscope, and one of the shadow sides with this transit is that your practicality can suffer. Obviously, if you're off in the ethereal realms with your mental, and feeling work and sensitized state, then you can find that the practical suffers somewhat, and you're just perhaps not as grounded as you usually are in the analytical. If that's a problem, maybe you could seek ways to combine the analytical with the ethereal, like the example I gave before of Japanese scientist Masaru Emoto. Try to bring in a combination of ethereal and analytical where possible, and it kind of balances things out. But yes, practicality might go out the window with this particular 14-year transit too, and you're lost in your beautiful fantasy land. Is that so bad? I don't know. I think that could be okay. We can become impressionable because Neptune is notorious for gullibility. So during this 14 years, and that's a long time, but during this 14 years, it's a really good idea if you deal with a lot of contracts, if you deal with a lot of trade agreements, if you deal with a lot of very sort of tangible stuff like that, practical, where there's a need for practicality and a need for you to sort of not be gullible, then get advice from professionals. Get somebody to look over your contracts and give you a second opinion on things, because your impressionability and your gullibility could be dangerous if you work in a career where legalities and formalities and fine details, where analytical thinking is required. We can lose our objectivity and our discriminative abilities as well. It's not that they're gone and suddenly we're not discriminative any longer. It's just they're lessened because it's like a balancing act, I guess. The feeling side of you and the intuitive side of you rises up. And so here is your analytical and discriminative processes here. They're still there, but what's predominating more? It is the feeling side. So we don't lose them, so to speak, but they become comparatively lessened compared to what is the predominant energy while Neptune is transiting the third house. Now, this next issue was something that I struggled with at school, being a highly Piscean person, is daydreaming, not concentrating. So, this is highly likely to be the case. And of course, this is also a house, the third house is a house of transport and localized travel. So this, you'll find a lot during this particular 14-year period that there will be times when you arrive at your destination and you go, hang on, how did I get here? I don't even remember driving from X to Z. Far out. Because daydreaming, because going off into another mental ethereal realm with your thinking while you're driving, third house, getting from destination to destination. So I'm sure many people have had that experience. I certainly have it quite a bit, where I'll end up in where I'm going and I can't remember how I actually got there or what I was just zoned out. I don't know that that's actually a dangerous thing, but certainly it's better if we can be engaged in the moment in certain situations, such as driving. So be aware that there will be circumstances, not just when you're driving, but in everyday life, when you are not concentrating and when you're in a more daydreamy mode. And if you need to take sort of precautions, like maybe turn Siri on so that she can be your guide to bring you back into the present moment when you're driving down the road to a destination, do things that can help you sort of mitigate any dangers of that might be present when you're not concentrating or you're in a daydreamy kind of state. But otherwise, why not? I mean, if I love, and I talk about this often, sitting on the couch, staring out the window with a cup of tea and just going into my thoughts, being present with my imagination. And I love that. Why not enjoy that on occasions throughout this 14-year period? It's a lovely influence of Neptune. Now, this is the house of relatives and siblings and, as I've said, your immediate neighborhood and locality. And your relationships with these people can kind of suffer for 14 years under this transit because of communication haziness. Neptune is foggy. Neptune is illusionary. And so it's like things aren't clear. So you might tell your neighbor, yeah, I'm going to cut down my tree that's on the boundary or whatever. And they think that you've said something completely different, and they're reporting you to the council because, oh, she said she's going to cut down the tree and I don't want it cut down. And, there's a misunderstanding, misinterpretations of communications that could be there, and even deception, to be honest, because Neptune does rule deception, to be deceived, to have the wool pulled over your eyes. So you might find that neighbors might be deceiving you, siblings might be deceiving you in the complete shadow side of this transit, but in the sort of ordinary everyday, it could be just that communications are hazy. So heads up on that one. Neighbours and siblings might also act secretive or elusive. Now, Neptune is a very secretive planet. As we talked about in the intro, what's at the core of Neptune is very different than what appears on the surface. And so the way a neighbour might be behaving outwardly to you might be very different to what's going on underneath the surface. The way a sibling is interacting with you might be really different to what they're doing behind your back. Again, that deception, that secretive behavior, that sort of elusive, I'm not quite getting the full picture here with their behavior. And you to them as well. They might not be getting the full picture of what you're really feeling, what you're really thinking, and what you're really experiencing as well. There can be feelings of insecurity that come along with this 14-year transit, because our ability to control our daily life through that practical application of analysis and rationality and what have you, it's kind of diminished. Wherever Neptune goes is where we let go and let God. And in the Vedic system, this is the house of daily life. And so we might find that we're kind of feeling very insecure because letting go and letting God makes us vulnerable. Vulnerable to growth and blessing, but also vulnerable to, the rug being pulled out from under us sometimes too, if that's what the universe should want. So just be aware that you might be feeling very insecure about your daily life. It doesn't mean that things are going to fall apart. It's just a feeling that Neptune brings to this area of life. But this is a wonderful, wonderful transit for artistry, for creativity and expression through film, through music, through dance, through art, and like I said before, craftsmanship, because Neptune brings the inspiration from the divine for all of those things. So enjoy this time, get creative, use your spare time, play time to bring that Neptunian influence into your life. Create, do a floral arrangement for your living room, or spend some time dancing, go and learn the tango or something like that. You'll have so much fun under this influence from Neptune. But it gives a flexible mind as well. We're more malleable wherever Neptune goes, more easily molded, for better or worse sometimes. But here in the house of mental activity, we become more intuitive, we become more psychic because of our flexible mind. And so our mind can receive things that it may never have received before, downloads, ideas, inspirations that we haven't known before. Studying psychology is a great thing to do as well under this transit, because Neptune can take you very, very deep as well. Even as a hobby or a side interest, go and study Enneagram or do a Myers-Briggs test and get familiar with all the personality types, and you might find that your mental mind really enjoys going into those realms under this transit too. And I just want to conclude this little session on Neptune transiting the third house by saying it is a very valuable time, as I think I've already mentioned actually, for getting clarity with things of a sort of a contractual nature, or negotiations or trading or business. It's a good time for getting clarity from others. And that's simply because Neptune, to draw in a phrase from shamanic astrology, Neptune is the antidote to clarity. Like we need an antidote to clarity, but Neptune has its reasons for being the antidote to clarity. And here, where we may actually require quite legitimately a bit of clarity in our lives with our trade deals and our communications and so on, draw in other people to sort of support you now, if you have anything of importance in that realm. On the flip side, Neptune is connected with advertising. Neptune is connected with marketing because of its ability to paint a picture that isn't quite the real deal. So if you are in any of these industries, marketing and advertising, spin doctors and what have you, you're going to do very well under this transit because Neptune's going to give you the creative downloads to really make things sell well, to create that image that you want to create, that illusion that you want to create that will hook people and draw people in. Now that might sound a bit deceptive, but let's face it, that's what the advertising industry does do. So marketing, PR, advertising, all of that stuff if you're in those fields, you stand to benefit quite a good deal for the next 14 years by Neptune transiting here. So thanks for joining me for this view of Neptune through the third house. Don't forget that in 14 years' time, when you have Neptune moving through a different house in the horoscope, the fourth house, tune in again to this series and find out what Neptune has in store for you. I'll catch you then.